We're Brianna and Keely, and you're listening to the Where We Live podcast, where we discuss all things home.
You'll hear from us on residential real estate, the process of buying and selling a home, design trends, entrepreneurship, faith, and much more.
In this episode, we are covering one of our most frequently asked questions. Should I write a letter to the seller to include with my offer? In today's hot market where you are likely competing with other buyers to get a home, we are on board with making your offer stand out. But what are the risks in submitting a love letter?
Alongside the topic of love letters, we want to highlight some issues with discrimination and fair housing in the real estate process. Residential real estate has a complex history with discrimination, and we want you to understand how the rules that are in place today came to be.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, today's episode is going to be fairly short and sweet, but there's a lot of history here in terms of discrimination with real estate. We want you to understand more about kind of why things are the way they are today and what your rights are as both a buyer and a seller, just to make sure that you're covered, but also to make sure that you get the house that you want at the end of the day. We represent all types of buyers and sellers, and we want to make sure that it's fair to each and every one of you. And so today's episode is going to shed a little light on the history of that and how, as a community, we can be, I think, better and fairer members of society as a result.
Yep. So let's start with love letters. The term love letter might feel a little silly to you when we're talking about buying and selling real estate. And there are different terms. People just simply call it a letter sometimes, but we use the term love letter most frequently because that's what it is. We are trying to, when a buyer writes a love letter to a seller, they are trying to use some emotional pull. I always say, pull at the heartstrings of the seller. Get their attention by writing a love letter. So that is what this is. It's a letter that a buyer would write to accompany their offer to explain a little bit about themselves, how they envision this house becoming their home, etc., and a kind of a plea to choose their offer.
And the reason we're talking about this is that we see this work all the time. We're seeing it work today. And sellers take lower offers or give yours an edge because they like you. They like who you are. And selling is emotional as well as financial. And so a lot of people have a vision of the kind of person that they could see living in their home. Now, so love letters can be really helpful as a buyer to get the house. There's actually nothing against submitting a letter here in the state of Texas. That's perfectly legal here today. As a buyer, you're doing nothing wrong. In our opinion, it can be helpful, but only if your offer is strong in today's market. So see episode 38, How to Win in Multiple Offers, for more information. We take a deeper dive on this. Love letters in general are a touchy subject. They do work, but it's risky. And that's one of the more current issues that I think we're dealing with, which is what gave us the idea to dig into this today.
Yep. So our broker currently recommends against submitting photos with these letters. And it's likely, honestly, that the letters altogether will be outlawed soon. So the reason being is because it really gets into a lot of fair housing issues. So let's camp out on that for a bit and talk about what does that mean, fair housing issues. Let's go over some history and some terms that you may hear being used. We'll explain what they are.
Yeah, absolutely. So just some basic vocabulary that as a non-realtor you probably have never heard of before, so we thought we'd cover it. In the past, there was a large history of redlining. If you've never heard of that, it's basically various services were denied to residents of a certain, often racially associated neighborhood or community. So that showed up in the banking and insurance industries, as well as many other industries where different prices were given to different neighbors, or they were completely denied altogether. So in literally black and white, an example was there were Black African-American communities where people could not get loans because the neighborhood was designated as a white neighborhood. They were literally not allowed to move in there. They could not get a loan there. And so that, obviously is a really dark history. It was done all over America, and it's a lot of the reason of why these laws are in place, so that people can live where they want to live and they can have access to the homes they want to have access to.
Our next vocabulary word is steering. So steering is a form of discrimination whereby a real estate professional influences someone's housing decision based on their race, religion, or another protected characteristic covered by the 1968 Fair Housing Act.
So we see this most commonly when people ask us, still today, obviously, I want to be in a good neighborhood. We're like, what does that mean? And it's your choice if you want to be in a certain neighborhood. That's still completely your choice. Steering was on the professional side. So as a realtor, if we made that assumption for you, if we said, these are the kinds of neighborhoods that really you're going to like, these are the kinds of neighborhoods that you're going to fit in based on XYZ without your consent. And so same thing, kind of realtors in the past or other service providers were grouping groups of people together based on those protected classes and against their consent. If you ask to be in a community of a certain type, maybe near your synagogue or whatever that looks like, that's your choice, right? We don't get to make that choice for you. And that's what steering was.
Yep. Our next vocabulary word is blockbusting, which I'm guessing you really have not heard of, at least used in the real estate world. But blockbusting is the practice of persuading owners to sell their property cheaply because of the fear of people of another race or class moving into the neighborhood. This is something that our broker has told us happened when he was young and first in the real estate world in the 80s, I think, here in Dallas.
Yeah, there was white flight.
Yeah,
that's what it was
overnight.
called, out of Oak Cliff. People said, hey, people are moving in, you got to get out of here. People sold their houses and ran, which is crazy.
Yeah, it talks about the neighborhood changing overnight. And so that being influenced by a real estate professional is called blockbusting, instilling that fear.
Okay, so good news. We've made some progress here and continuing to make progress, which I think is our discussion really here today. But the Civil Rights Act of 1866 prohibited all racial discrimination in the sale or rental of a property. So that was the baseline for saying, hey, we can't be redlining, we can't be blockbusting, we can't be steering anymore. Housing needs to be available to all races equally. The Fair Housing Act is the one that really expanded that. And it's a national law, so no matter what state you're in, it covers you, that makes discrimination in the sale, the lease, or the general availability of housing. You can't discriminate based on race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, or national origin. So you can't say, hey, I don't like that person from XYZ country. I don't like that person's single. I don't like that person has a different belief system from me, right? All of those things are covered to have an equal playing field amongst people that want to buy your home.
So you can see how this might make love letters problematic. Okay, because in that letter you might be saying, hey, I am a young family with XYZ and I am of this color and this religion and I'm just like you, so pick me.
And we will all come from Germany,
and,
or whatever it is. Yes.
Yep. So we went into detail on this in episode 44. If you scroll back on our Clear Cooperation Act, talked a lot about this. So go back and get some more information, and you'll learn what sellers can and cannot do.
Yeah. These laws are being updated constantly to make sure that everyone just has a fair chance at getting the right house. So really the goal of this is, what are your responsibilities as a result of these laws, as a result of the past? Today, where are we at and what should we be doing? I think the main responsibility lands on us as professionals first and foremost, but you as a seller or a landlord. So you have the responsibility not to discriminate based on race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, or national origin. Now, when it comes to handicap accessibility, ADA rules don't comply to residential, just so you know. In a previously built home, you don't have to make accommodations for a handicap. You just can't discriminate based on that. You also can't instruct your broker or your realtor to place any limitations based on these either. Hey, only families can apply, to buy this house or to rent this place.
Yeah. So as a buyer, then, on the flip side, you have the right to expect that housing will be available to you without any kind of discrimination. What are some other ways that we see fair housing pop up, Keely?
Yeah. So we said, hey, when buyers ask, I want to live in a good neighborhood, you've got to specify things that means for you, right? Schools that are rated X, a yard that is half an acre, whatever that is. We're going to ask pretty specific questions about that. We're not going to just guess what that means for you. So as a buyer, love letters are still currently allowed in Texas, but be careful, right? If the seller indicates that they chose you because of one of these protected classes, it could be a cause for a lawsuit against them, right? And so if it was found that maybe you procured the house in an unethical way, I don't know if that might eventually have repercussions for you. It's really not your responsibility as a buyer, which is why we're still submitting them. But as a seller, I would really beware, right? You, and as a landlord as well, you're allowed to say, hey, you have too many dogs. You're not allowed to say, we disagree on beliefs, and so this is a no for me. So just be careful. I think it's absolutely something to be aware of, and we're always here to answer questions if you're concerned about it.
Well, we hope that this quick episode helps you understand some of the history of fair housing laws and your responsibility as both a buyer and a seller.
It's our job as realtors to continue to make sure that housing is equally available to everyone. And as your agents, we continue to strive to be above bar on everything we do. Thanks in advance for your understanding and your willingness to be educated on this topic.
That wraps up another episode of the Where We Live podcast. We want to hear which topics interest you most for our upcoming shows.
Head on over to wherewelivepodcast.com to continue the conversation in our Facebook group, read our blog, and connect with us. Thanks for tuning in.